Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for May 14th, 2018. On today's show, we're going to be talking about what we've been up to and watching and discuss the latest film and TV news. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is senior writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writer Hoai-Tran Bui.
Hey, everyone.
So before we get into the news, guys, let's go over to the water cooler and talk about what we've been up to. Over the weekend, I attended the junket for Solo, a Star Wars story. Don't worry, there's not going to be any spoilers here. I talked to Ron Howard, the credited director, and the writers, the Kasdans, and I got a lot of good content from that will show up on the site closer to release and even after release, because we had some spoiler-filled discussions that will show up the week after the movie hits theaters. It's always interesting to at a Star Wars junket, because Disney, I guess, I'm reading in between the lines here, but I think people are interested in this. Disney always holds these Star Wars junkets at not the usual place. Usually a junket for a movie is usually held in the same 3 hotels in Beverly Hills. And for Force Awakens, the junket was held in I think in the Los Angeles Convention Center. So they have these weird locations, and we're told ahead of time, when we're there and we're posting it on social media, we're not allowed to tag the location, have our location, settings on for any of the, social media postings we do while we're there. I'm assuming it's because Star Wars fans are just, more, likely to show up than others. This one was held at the Pasadena Convention Center, which is kind of way out there. And it was interesting because I think there was a graduation going on next door, and there's a huge party there, and none of these people know it, but they were 10 steps away from huge Hollywood stars in these makeshift tents that they built in a convention center where they do their interviews. But yeah, so
Actually, that reminds me of this fact that I just learned, that the Oscars are held at a mall, and just
well, that's a little. Well, yeah, I guess it is a mall.
I mean, it's it has the Dolby Theater is really nice, but then it's right across from, I think, a Hooters or something like that. So that's really funny to me, which is something I only learned about recently.
A Hooters, a Buffalo Wild Wings. It's a very touristy area, so there's a lot of really those kind of places around in that area. But it's the Hollywood and Highland Center, which is Ben, how would you describe it?
It's basically an outdoor mall. I think that's a good way of describing it. Yeah, there's a 2-story shopping center, or maybe 3 stories even. Shopping center. There's a Dave and Buster's there, and it's just a place that tourists go. I kind of call it the Times Square of Hollywood, basically.
That is a good description of it, because it's right next to Mann's Chinese Theater, and where they have those unauthorized characters in costumes begging people for money. But the interesting thing about this mall, and if you actually want to look it up, not to spend too much time on this, but it's actually based on the set from an old 1916 film called Intolerance. It's the Babylon set, and it's pretty extravagant. It reminds me of something you'd see in Las Vegas, Caesar's Palace or something. It's very grand, although it's grand, but there's a hot topic.
Right, yeah. The juxtaposition is pretty stark.
Yeah. Anyways, I don't know how we got sidetracked to this, but Ben, what have you been up to?
On Friday night, I went to Universal Studios Hollywood because the studio was holding a 25th anniversary celebration for Jurassic Park, Steven Spielberg's original 1993 movie. This is the first time that the studio has sort of celebrated an anniversary for this movie in this way, and it was basically just they opened up. So if you guys are familiar with Universal Studios Hollywood, there's the park, and then you sort of go down a series of escalators to a lower level of the theme park, and down there is like Jurassic Park the ride, and there's like a little area basically that has a bunch of Jurassic Park themed cafes and stores and what have you. So that area was sort of the centerpiece, the nexus for this whole celebration. And
so were you not allowed to go to that area unless you had a ticket to this event?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, they at a certain point, I think it was 7 p.m., like the park closed like it normally does. But if you had a lanyard, a badge for this particular event, you could go down there, and that's really when the whole thing sort of kicked off. So it was great because everybody got to ride the ride with very little lines. I mean, you could just walk onto it, with no time at all, really. And they had this whole area set up with props and vehicles and costumes from the movies, the whole Jurassic franchise. And I brought my video camera and took a bunch of video and edited together a video for Slash Film. So you can check that out. We'll link to it in the show notes. But yeah, I just put together this really cool little sort of highlight reel of some of the stuff that they had going on there. Colin Trevorrow, the director of Jurassic World, was the moderator of a series of panels. So this celebration actually happened Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night. I was there on Friday, and Dennis Murin, the visual effects supervisor for the original movie, was there. Assistant director John Kretschmer was there, and cinematographer Dean Cundy, who also shot like Back to the Future and a bunch of other stuff, was there. And they were sort of just essentially doing a big Q&A on a stage in front of the crowd. So that was really cool for Jurassic Park fans to be able to be there and hear all these making of stories from these guys. But as cool as it was to hear those legends talk about making this movie, it feels like I picked the wrong night to go, because the next night on Saturday, Laura Dern was there, and then Sunday night Jeff Goldblum was there, and Jordan Vogt-Roberts, who directed Kong Skull Island, and Gareth Edwards, who directed Rogue One, stopped by, and they were on the panel that night as well. So I was like, oh man, it was cool being there on Friday, but definitely sounds like Saturday and Sunday were the real nights that you wanted to be there. But there was like costume contests and trivia and all sorts of cool stuff there.
Was there any interesting facts you learned about the original Jurassic Park that you did not know?
Peter, sadly, the answer is no. I was so bummed too, because Trevorrow was like, all right, he opened the Q&A basically setting these guys up, saying, all right, everybody who's here are the diehard Jurassic Park fans. We know all the stuff that is on all of the behind-the-scenes DVD clip reels and all that kind of stuff. Tell us some stories that we wouldn't know before. And they really kind of didn't. They just stuck to stuff that everybody pretty much knew. I mean, it was still good, and I think there may have been one or two little nuggets in there, but for the most part, it was a familiar trip down memory lane. But it was still nice, and I mean, it was really cool to see everybody just gathered and dressed up as Mr. DNA, and there was really ridiculous costumes on display, and it seemed like people were having a really good time.
Yeah, looking at your video and looking at some of the photos, it was nice to see that they had like some deep cuts and like the prop displays. Like they had like Jeff Goldblum his character's book from the movie.
Yep.
Yeah, no,
those are deep cuts.
Yeah. So yeah, go check out the site. We will link to it in the show notes, and you can watch Ben's video, which is a pretty brisk, like 2-minute video. It's a fun watch. But HT, you've been busy seeing a lot of movies, catching up with movies before they leave theaters. What have you been watching?
Yeah, I've been catching up on a lot of films that are soon to leave theaters, I think. The first two are The Death of Stalin and You Were Never Really Here. So You Were Never Really Here is Len Ramsey's film starring Joaquin Phoenix as a hitman of sorts who sort of targets pedophiles who traffic young girls. And Death of Stalin, in like big 180, is a sort of political satire by Armando Iannucci. Is that how you say his name? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I saw both of those that weekend, and I was kind of amazed that I was able to catch them because they've both been in theaters for, I think, at least a month or so, or maybe even longer. And they were miraculously still at the Landmark near my house. So that was really exciting. You Were Never Really Here was especially so phenomenal to me because I had seen Lynn Ramsey's other film, We Need to Talk About Kevin, and it had really unnerved me and really discomforted me. But You Were Never Really Here was just another level of brilliance, I think. And Joaquin Phoenix's just sheer physicality in that film, and just like the movie's whole sort of really tight editing style and its kind of anti-action take on this very brutal story was really fascinating to me. And it might have been it might be one of my favorite movies of the year so far, but we'll see. We're almost halfway through the year, by the way, so that's kind of exciting. I really like Death of Stalin too. I was really expecting to like Iannucci's work just because I love everything he's done so far with Veep, In the Thick of It, In the Loop, and that was hilarious. And definitely Steve Buscemi was a standout as well. And I also saw Tully. So that was the newer ones of the films I saw.
That's the new Jason Reitman film, right?
Yes, new Jason Reitman, Diablo Cody film. It's their third collaboration, and it's a film about motherhood. It's kind of interesting. They're kind of creating their own sort of before trilogy in a way, in that each of their films deal with like a separate part of adulthood. So like Juno, and then young adult, and now Tully dealing with young teen pregnancy, sort of arrested development, and with an older adults in the middle one with young adults. And then so Tully deals with sort of postpartum depression and almost postpartum psychosis in a way. It has a really interesting twist that I won't give away, but it is something that kind of elevates the film from being a really sad and depressing and realistic look at one woman's struggle with like with giving birth to her third child, and it kind of elevates it to something else entirely. And it's a really great film. All these films I saw actually are really good. I recommend all of them if you can catch them in theaters. Tully, I think, will be in theaters for quite a bit. But if you aren't seeing Avengers Infinity War for the third time, try checking out some of these other smaller films.
You know, HJ, we love to publicly shame you on the podcast for the films you have not seen. Now is your chance, because I have not seen any of these films. And instead, I have watched Cobra Kai 2 times and seen Solo: A Star Wars Story twice. I feel bad because actually 2 of these films I really, really do want to see in theaters, and I have that movie pass, so I have no excuse. Does that mean
I can shame you? I can shame you now?
Shame me. Okay, let's jump into the news. Let's start off with a bit of sad news. Ben, what is going on?
Yes, Margot Kidder, the actress who played Lois Lane in the live-action Superman movies, has died at the age of 69, so that's kind of sad. Kidder was, she really, sort of burst into superstardom playing Lois Lane. She portrayed that role in Richard Donner's original 1978 Superman, and reprised the role in Superman 2, Superman 3, and Superman 4. So she played that character from 1978 to 1987, and she actually sort of, like most of the characters or actors who appeared in that franchise, popped up on Smallville in the mid-2000s as well, because that show loved to sort of throw out the lasso to these legacy cast members as well. Margot Kidder was also a mainstay in the horror community. She showed up in movies like the Amityville Horror and Black Christmas, and Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, and a bunch of others. I think she won an Emmy for one of the TV shows that she worked on with R.L. Stine, the creator of Goosebumps. She also did a bunch of voice work later in her career. 90s kids might recognize her as the voice of Gaia from Captain Planet and the Planeteers. I know I grew up watching that show.
I had no idea.
Yeah. I guess she was in like 13 episodes of the show or something doing that voice, so that was kind of cool. I didn't know that until I was doing this research for this little obituary article either. But her Lois Lane, man, she was really, really great. She had this really terrific mixture of being clumsy, but also determined and confident and nervous, and her chemistry with Christopher Reeve, who played Superman, was just off the charts. So, she'll be greatly missed.
Yeah, I don't have a huge attachment to Margot Kidder, but I love the original Superman films, especially the original from Richard Donner. I love the I guess spunk that she had in those movies. Mm-hmm. Although I was so irritated as a kid, Clark shouldn't be in love with this woman who is just in love with the fame of Superman and not him. I don't know. Anyways, yes, but she will be missed. I now want to revisit the original Superman the movie. Maybe I'll do that tonight. But let's move on to the future of superhero movies and female characters in those universes. We now know that Marvel is planning on doing a Miss Marvel movie, or she's going to be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in some way. HT, what do we know?
So Miss Marvel, aka Kamala Khan, may be coming to the Marvel Cinematic Universe in some capacity.
Wait a second, HT. I'm gonna be the voice of the people listening to this podcast that don't know about comic books. I thought there was a Miss Marvel movie coming out next year with Brie Larson.
So that is a Captain Marvel movie, and this may actually be a little confusing even for comic book fans, because Carol Danvers, the character at the center of Captain Marvel, actually used to go by the name Miss Marvel before she got promoted to Captain. In the comics, she essentially was the sort of sidekick of the original Captain Marvel, who was a Kree alien named Mar-Vell. And eventually she became such a popular character that she went on to have her own title and take on take on a new costume and a new title as Captain Marvel. But in the wake of Carol Danvers becoming Captain Marvel, she became sort of an inspiration not only outside of the comics but in the comics themselves. So Kamala Khan is a character who's kind of unrelated to Carol Danvers, actually, but she is the ultimate Captain Marvel fangirl. She's in the comics, she's this Pakistani American teenager who idolizes Carol Danvers and basically wants to be Captain Marvel. And one night her powers become awakened as part of like this Inhuman plot line that kind of was tied into Marvel trying to push more Inhumans in the comics. She gained shape-shifting powers and decided to take on the mantle of her hero, or the former mantle of a hero, Miss Marvel. So she made her comic book debut in 2014, and she immediately became a fan favorite character. Her comic book debut is really great. I have the first trade issue, and she is so vibrant and funny and hilarious and awkward, and it's definitely kind of the sort of successor of Spider-Man in a way. She has that really
it's almost like a female Spider-Man. Yeah,
exactly. She has this relatable vibe to her, and she's struggling to balance her teenage high school years with her own sort of strict religious upbringing, and living in the shadow of her hero as well, and her own superheroic life. So it's she's a really great character, and fans have been sort of clamoring for her to make a debut in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or at least the Netflix series, for a while now. And Kevin Feige has sort of addressed this at this point. So in an interview with the BBC, Kevin Feige confirmed that a Miss Marvel movie is, quote, definitely sort of in the works, unquote.
Sort of?
So let me read his full quote. We're doing Captain Marvel right now. Captain Marvel is shooting right now with Brie Larson. Miss Marvel, which is another character in the comic books, the Muslim hero who is inspired by Captain Marvel, is definitely sort of in the works. We have plans for that once we've introduced Captain Marvel to the world. So he's being a little vague again in the classic Kevin Feige kind of misdirecting way, in that he doesn't confirm whether we meet her in Captain Marvel, the film that comes out in 2019, or whether this is a movie or project that's planned after Captain Marvel is released. But he is confirming at this point that Miss Marvel is in the works. Apropos enough of nothing either. This interviewer didn't ask him if a Miss Marvel movie was in the works, or maybe they did. I'm not sure actually.
It's also interesting because much of her origin story, involves the Inhumans, which was a failed TV series on ABC in conjunction with IMAX. I don't think we'll see them involved with her origin story in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for that reason. So it'll be interesting to see, how Kevin Feige decides to bring her powers to the big screen.
I will say, though, they did manage to introduce the Inhuman storyline in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. They had a whole subplot in which the Inhuman crystal was disseminated throughout the world through like a fish pill, essentially, because it contaminated the fishes around the world, and then the humans started bursting out throughout. Started appearing throughout the world. So this may be tied into that. I'm not sure if they'll want to tie it to the TV series, but you might be right.
They don't even acknowledge the TV series in any of the movies. Hashtag it's not connected at all. So I don't know. I just think they're going to have to go a different way with it. I think, they don't want to tie it to S.H.I.E.L.D. I mean, it's going to be over by the time that, a movie comes out.
Very true.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting. But let's move on to a possible Willow sequel. Ron Howard has been doing press for Solo: A Star Wars Story. As I mentioned earlier, I talked to him. I was going to bring up Willow. I'm glad I didn't because someone else got the scoop on this one. Ben, what do we know?
Yes, in a new interview with comicbook.com, Ron Howard says there's been a little talk about a Willow sequel. So his exact quote was, "I don't want to give away too much, but there is a little talk of Willow. We wouldn't call it Willow 2. I think it would focus a lot on Elora Danan, although Willow would have to be significantly involved." So that's his quote, and it's surprising because, I mean, this movie came out in 1988, so we're talking about 30 years ago, and it didn't really perform as well as they wanted it to at the time, but now, I guess maybe because of like the whole nostalgia thing, there's maybe enough momentum to actually get this thing going and off the ground again. Peter, do you want to see a Willow sequel at this point?
As a fan growing up with Star Wars, when, they announced that Ron Howard was doing a movie, created by George Lucas, set in this fantasy world, I was so excited. This is a movie I grew up with, loving, but it is a movie that I have watched many, many times. Almost like, I mean, the thing is, I would almost be more interested in seeing a spin-off or origin story of, Val Kilmer's character, Mad Mardigan, who's kind of almost like the Han Solo of that movie. But I'm not sure if we need another Willow movie or a sequel or a reboot. I don't know. I'm not even sure there's enough of that in that world to make it that unique. But it seems like, we are living in a day and age where, going back and putting the taps in 80s nostalgia is playing real big. So maybe now is the time for a Willow property of some kind.
It would be really interesting to see Ron Howard go back to a world like that, though, because I feel like he's changed so much as a filmmaker since he made that movie. And it would be, I guess this Solo: A Star Wars Story is sort of like that's an outlier in Ron Howard's recent filmography. He's been making like the Da Vinci Code movies and like stuff that's definitely aimed squarely at an adult audience and sort of like straight down the middle kind of stuff. But Willow 2 would not be that. It would definitely be, a return to this fantasy weirdness. And I wonder what that would do for Howard's directing, like if that would sort of invigorate him and inspire him to go in different directions. I don't know.
I don't think he would be that involved. I think he would be involved as a producer. As I mentioned in my interview with him, he's directed like over 35 films at this point. And the only sequels he has done up until now was the Da Vinci Code sequels, which he even noted, are adaptations, not sequels to a movie. And he doesn't consider Solo: A Star Wars Story a sequel. He considers it a standalone movie. I don't know. I kind of got the impression that he is not a person that's interested in sequels. I almost wonder, this movie was released by MGM. But I think Lucasfilm was involved in it. I wonder if Disney has the rights to the Willow franchise as they do, Indy and Star Wars. And if so, Disney has this streaming service and they're creating all sorts of original TV shows and movies. Maybe this project that he doesn't want to spoil has something to do with that. Not that I know of it, know anything. I'm just, spitballing here. But maybe that's another way that Disney is plotting to get us, to spend that, like, $10 or $15, $20 a month for whatever they're going to call their television service, their television streaming service. But let's move on to something I thought was a little interesting, and that is the news story is not that interesting. The story is that fans have started a petition, because that's what they like to do, to try to get Disney to release Avengers Infinity War on home video with the IMAX sequences. If you don't know, Avengers Infinity War was the first movie shot completely with IMAX cameras, IMAX digital cameras, which means the aspect ratio was bigger than the normal 2.39 by 1. For the most part, a lot of these movies that have these IMAX shot scenes that expand on the IMAX screen, when they're released on Blu-ray or home video, they're released only in the the widescreen aspect ratio, which is unfortunate, because I kind of love when I put The Dark Knight in my Blu-ray player, that in those 70mm scenes, it expands to not the full, but it expands to 16 by 9. The full on those were, it was shot in IMAX, so it's almost like almost by like 4:3 television set aspect ratio. I don't think anybody wants that. But nowadays IMAX movies are shot on more of an aspect ratio closer to 16 by 9. When you're watching these movies on home video, you're watching them with these little black bars. Do you guys have I was wondering, I was using this as a stepping point. Do you guys have any love for, these expanded scenes and, parts of movies? Do you care at all that a lot of these movies are only getting the wide aspect ratio release on home video?
Hey, She, what do you think?
I have actually never thought of it that way. It only bothers me if the parts of the shot is cut off, or if it doesn't have the same, it doesn't give the same effect as it's meant to in the theatrical version. So I wonder how well this sort of conversion is done.
Which theatrical version are you talking about? Because if you're talking about Ghostbusters, like the new Ghostbusters movie, if you saw that in IMAX, there was 3D things that came out of the screen into the black bar areas. I'm not sure if you thought that in that way, but that version of the movie, the IMAX version of the movie, is only available on the 3D version of the film, and not in. I mean, I guess I probably wouldn't want to see that in 2D, but that's a bad example. But so. The filmmakers are authoring these IMAX versions of the films. They're rendering special effects to be placed in those extra area, and they're filming it on location, looking at what's going to be in that space. Would I guess the question, HT, I'll ask you this: should we have the option of seeing an IMAX ratio?
I like that. I think I like the option for it. I think so. I will say yes.
Ben, do you have any feelings on this?
Yeah, I mean, the Dark Knight is interesting because that's one of the few movies that I return to on Blu-ray I don't know, I mean, not that often, because I tend to not watch the movies that I've purchased over and over again, because I tend to just watch new stuff as much as possible. But the Dark Knight, that Blu-ray looks so good that whenever I do throw it on, I am always sort of blown away anew every time when it really opens up, that framing opens up for those IMAX sequences. So yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, Peter, the idea of fans starting a petition is not actually going to accomplish anything. But I would like, with the idea of home theater systems getting better and better every year, I would like it if the studios sort of nodded to that and at least acknowledged it, and maybe gave people the option of, if you want it to replicate the big IMAX theatrical experience as much as possible in your home, then yeah, there should be an option for that. Why not?
I mean, I just think of, like, we have these 16:9 television sets in our homes, and, we're wasting part of that television set with a black bar that doesn't need to be there because the filmmaker has shot something that could be in that place. I totally understand someone, maybe being like, I want the final version of it to be the widescreen aspect ratio, but, like, at least give us the option. If you are a fan of the Marvel movies and you want to see the, expanded IMAX version of those films, the only way to get that on home video is buying the 3D versions of the movies. And I think we're kind of on the outs of the 3D movie at home days, at least right now. So, like, I want the option, and I feel like in a day and age where delivering a digital file of a movie is easier than ever, like, how hard is it for Disney or any of these companies to put that file available on a server and allowing people to spend, a premium extra $5 more than the movie to access, the expanded IMAX version of the movie that will fill their TV sets?
Right.
They can make more money. Why not? But, okay. Anyways, that's enough of my rant. Let's move on to our next story, and that is Brooklyn Nine-Nine has been canceled. Or has it? HD, what do we know?
Brooklyn Nine-Nine may indeed have 99 lives because it was canceled by its current network, Fox. But a few days later, after an emotional roller coaster was had by all fans of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, NBC picked it up. And so it actually seems like a fitting sort of return to the network where it was first pitched, because Mike Schur, who is the co-creator of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, initially pitched it to NBC, which passed, and it went ultimately to Fox. But it actually is produced by Universal TV, which is under NBC, so it's kind of a nice return to the network it felt like it always belonged to. And I'm very excited about this. Brooklyn Nine-Nine is an amazing show that is a force for good in this world. And like a lot of Mike Schur shows like Parks and Recreation and The Good Place, it comes at comedy from a place of heart, some place that it feels like an ultimately earnest and optimistic show, which is actually kind of rare nowadays. So I'm so happy that it's coming back to NBC. I'm crossing my fingers for double block of Brooklyn Nine-Nine and The Good Place. So it's a big celebration right now. And thank you, NBC, for saving Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yeah, no, I have not watched the show, so I cannot comment on this. But we are running a little bit long, so let's go. Let's move on to some news from Netflix. They have announced they are teaming with Guillermo Del Toro on a new horror anthology series. I need this, beamed into my head right now. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, this is Netflix's first original horror anthology show, and it is called Guillermo Del Toro Presents 10 After Midnight. And Del Toro, who recently won an Oscar for The Shape of Water, is going to be, the official press release says that he's going to be personally curating these stories. So he's going to be bringing his own visionary style as both a writer and director to certain episodes. So, I mean, I think that means he's going to be writing and directing some episodes of the show, and he's going to be handpicking a team of horror's best writers and up-and-coming filmmakers, and allowing them to sort of play in this playground that he creates. So it sounds like he's really using the Hollywood juice that he earned from The Shape of Water in a really cool way. I mean, he's been working with Netflix for a little while on Troll Hunters, the animated series, but this is going to be a live-action horror anthology show, and we don't really know the scope of it in terms of like what it's going to be about or what any of the individual episodes are going to be about. But the idea of Del Toro working in this form sounds very exciting to me. So yeah, I mean, beam it right into my brain right now.
I am so excited about this. HT, are you excited?
I am so excited. I absolutely love Guillermo Del Toro and all of his films, and because of the way that this is presented, the Guillermo Del Toro presents, it kind of gives me an Alfred Hitchcock presents kind of vibe. So I'm hoping that in the vein of Hitchcock, maybe Del Toro will appear at the beginning of each episode, or make a cameo at least in the episodes, and give that kind of spooky sort of 50s style anthology series vibe. So I'm excited. I can't wait.
That would be awesome. I was also thinking, like, maybe he'll find a lot of these horror anthology series try to connect the stories together in some way, and they rarely are successful in that. And I'm wondering if he has figured out a way to, string along the series together in some way. It's also worth pointing out that, the network TV shows are doing a lot of their announcements this week. We'll cover some of that tomorrow on the show. But, Netflix just announced their stuff all year long, and it goes to show me, because we're, writing about this for a living, how backwards it seems and how outdated the network way of doing things is. But, basically all the networks have announced, dozens of series in the last, few days. And, what's been renewed, what's been, what's coming back. Here's some trailers. Why are we still operating on this outdated notion that, there are seasons of television that start in fall and end, Ben, do you have any idea why?
I think it's all about the advertising, right? That's the way, that's why network TV is still the way it is. But I would really be interested. I'm sure we have a bunch of listeners who know all about this. I'm sure we have people who listen to the show who work in the industry. So if you guys know why network upfronts are still a thing, write in and let us know, because the idea of them sort of creating this bottleneck of information, like you're saying, Peter, where it's they wait until just a few days to release this stuff. That part doesn't make as much sense to me as the idea of at least their business models I can understand. And
even the scheduling part of things, I feel like when summer hits, I all of a sudden have nothing to watch on network television or cable television. It feels like everything comes to a dead halt. And I understand that people are on vacation, people are doing things during the summer, but, Netflix seems to be thriving in releasing content all year long. It doesn't seem to be a week that they're not releasing something new. I don't know, it just seems weird that, we have these seasons that, things start in September or whatever, and whenever.
It's like a tradition. Yeah, they're just tied to the tradition of it. I wonder if there is still a viable business reason for those decisions still working in 2018.
Yeah. If you know anything about that, write us, peter@slashfilm.com, and we'll mention you on the air. But let's move on to our last story, and this is going to require a spoiler warning for Avengers Infinity War. So if you have not seen the newest Marvel film, you will want to turn this off now, because this is going to spoil the end of that movie, which involves Thanos snapping and making half of the universe disappear. Which, by the way, I commented on Twitter today that I just realized that if Thanos actually did that and half of the people on Earth disappeared, it would only bring our population down to 1971 Earth. That's how much we've expanded in the last 48 years or something. That's insane to me. But anyways, okay, we have some new news on the directors of Infinity War. The Russo brothers have revealed who had survived and who died off screen. I'm not sure if this matters or not, but HD, tell us about it.
So Joe and Anthony Russo are continuing their post-Infinity War press tour and are clearing the air on who has survived and who hasn't survived and who is maybe too spoilery to confirm or deny whether they survived or not off-screen. So in a lightning round of questions with Huffington Post, they confirmed a few joke ones, a few serious ones, and a few ones that will fan favorites that will make you breathe a little easier. So some that are alive include Howard the Duck, who, as you may remember, made a cameo at the end of the Guardians of the Galaxy credit scene, and Aunt May, who is in Spider-Man Homecoming. And as we saw at the end of Homecoming, discovered Peter Parker's true identity. So now that Peter Parker has gone to dust at the end of Infinity War, she may have a few things to say to Tony Stark. I would actually be very excited to see whether she has a reaction to that. But a few who are confirmed to have been killed in the dusting, I'm not sure what we're calling it as of yet, are Betty Ross, who was Bruce Banner's presumably the love of his life in The Hulk, but has not been mentioned since and may as well have never existed at all. And actor Loki, aka Matt Damon in Thor Ragnarok. And also Lady Sif, who was not present at Asgard when Hela made her bloody conquest of the realm, but apparently was killed or is gone post-snap. So the rest of them are unconfirmed. So Nakia is unconfirmed. Ned from Spider-Man Homecoming is unconfirmed. Shuri is unconfirmed. She appeared in Infinity War, but we don't see what happens to her at the end. Korg is unconfirmed, so all of you who are big Korg fans. Jane Foster is unconfirmed, and all of those are unconfirmed per spoilers. So whenever the interviewer asked the Russo brothers what happened to them, they just answered with spoilers. So we don't know whether they're alive or dead, or whether the movies have future plans for any of these characters.
But why would it be spoilers if they were dead? I guess there's spoiler of the reveal that they're gone in Avengers 4. But does any of this really matter? Like, if Avengers 4 is going to theoretically correct this whole situation, does it matter who is alive and dead in the off-screen?
I mean, well, the Russo brothers are saying that these guys, everyone who died in the dusting, are dead. So per their words, officially they're dead. But I don't really know how much it matters. That's whether you will take the ending of Infinity War seriously, like, to heart, or whether you just believe that it will all be undone at the end and in the next year or so. So maybe it will make it easier for them to get rid of some of these characters that they never really used in the first place, because they're gone in the dusting, and they just stayed gone in the dusting, which is kind of a sad way to go.
Yeah, or like you were talking about, HJ, like the idea of seeing Aunt May reckon with Tony Stark in some way, even if Peter Parker does come back at some point, that trauma will still be real for her, and maybe she'll have a tighter leash on Peter. So maybe it'll matter in the sense of the way that their relationship unfolds over the course of future movies.
But is she going to remember the dusting, or if they go back in time and correct things?
I would be so mad if that happened.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. We're going to have to find out. But this brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find all these stories and more linked on the show notes and on slashfilm.com. This podcast is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and television, as well as deeper dives into the great features on slashfilm.com. You can subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns to peter@slashfilm.com. Please go rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.